Chosen one. Lift your perspective for a moment and recognize that you are no longer the victim in this story. You are now the witness to divine justice unfolding with precision. The chapter of survival has closed quietly, and a new chapter of revelation has begun, where you are not scrambling for clarity, but observing accountability take shape under heaven's authority. Psalm 37:34 urges you to wait for the Lord and keep His way, promising that you will see the wicked cut off, and what once sounded distant now feels tangible. You are not standing in revenge, you are standing in realization. The atmosphere has shifted, and what felt like chaos is aligning into consequence. There is a deeper spiritual truth beneath what you are witnessing. Those who tampered with your peace, distorted your integrity, and treated your grace as weakness are now encountering divine correction. What they initiated as betrayal has activated a reckoning they never anticipated. Because spiritual boundaries are not decorative, they are enforced. Galatians 6:7 reminds that a person reaps what they sow, and sowing into sacred ground produces a harvest that cannot be avoided. They believed they were maneuvering through a game of control and influence, unaware that what they were testing was not merely your patience, but divine jurisdiction over your life. What they saw as strategy was actually examination of their own character. You were never an innocent pawn moved around their board. You were the mirror, reflecting who they truly were. You were the test they failed to recognize, the boundary they assumed they could cross without consequence. Now the tables are turning not through your effort, but through divine response set in motion, proving that when covenant is challenged, heaven answers, and when peace is violated, justice awakens. Chosen one. There was a season when your peace was consistently misinterpreted, when the calm you carried was analyzed through a lens too shallow to recognize its origin, and that misreading became the doorway through which exploitation entered. They observed your restraint and assumed fragility, noticing your gentleness and concluding that you lacked the strength to confront or the will to defend. Yet Proverbs 16:32 declares that one who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and one who rules their spirit is greater than one who captures a city, revealing that mastery over self is superior to domination over others. Your peace was not absence of awareness, it was disciplined authority under control. They miscalculated because they equated volume with power and reaction with strength, overlooking that composure anchored in God is fortified beyond visible defense. What they interpreted as passivity was actually spiritual stability. What they labeled as softness was cultivated resilience. Their misunderstanding was not minor, it was foundational to their error. Because they believed your kindness lacked consequence, they took liberties they would not have dared take with someone louder or more visibly defensive, assuming that grace would absorb their behavior without resistance. Psalm 41:9 speaks of betrayal from one once trusted, and betrayal often begins where kindness is assumed to be endless and boundaries are underestimated. They treated your generosity as expendable, your empathy as exploitable, and your patience as permission. Galatians 6:7 warns that God is not mocked and that a person reaps what they sow. Yet they operated as though spiritual law would suspend itself in the presence of your composure. They assumed that because you did not retaliate immediately, there would be no repercussion eventually. Your forgiveness was interpreted as forgetfulness, and your silence as surrender. They calculated risk based on visible reaction, unaware that unseen authority governed the equation. Their confidence grew in proportion to their misunderstanding. What they saw as advantage was actually accumulation of accountability. Kindness misread becomes catalyst for correction. They looked at your silence and saw opportunity, believing they could manipulate narratives, distort conversations, and steer circumstances while you remained composed, not realizing that silence does not equal submission, but often signals surveillance under higher authority. Ecclesiastes 3:7 speaks of a time to keep silence and a time to speak, and your silence was not confusion, but timing. They mistook your refusal to escalate as inability to confront, unaware that peace can be more disarming than argument. Isaiah 30:15 teaches that in quietness and trust is strength, and that strength unsettles those who rely on chaos for leverage. You were observing, discerning, and aligning internally, while they assumed you were passive externally. The calm atmosphere you maintained prevented escalation that would have blurred accountability. Your stillness preserved clarity. Your composure allowed patterns to repeat long enough to become undeniable. They saw space to maneuver. Heaven saw space to reveal. Peace is not emptiness. It is charged with authority. What they did not realize is that peace rooted in God carries spiritual weight that shifts atmospheres without spectacle, because John 14:27 distinguishes Christ's peace from the world's peace, and that distinction determines outcome. Worldly calm can be manipulated, but divine peace recalibrates environments silently. Your steadiness functioned as a mirror, reflecting their instability without you having to expose it verbally. Psalm 34:14 urges seeking peace and pursuing it, implying that peace is active rather than passive. As you pursued peace, contrast intensified between alignment and manipulation. The more composed you remained, the more evident their agitation became. They grew impatient with your restraint because it denied them the chaos required to sustain control. Peace deprived them of leverage. Serenity undermined their strategy. The stillness they exploited became stage upon which truth surfaced. They underestimated the frequency on which your spirit operated. Now that peace has triggered a divine response they did not anticipate, because covenant does not ignore violation indefinitely. Isaiah 54:17 affirms that no weapon formed against you shall prosper. And though they formed intentions against you, prosperity of those intentions was denied quietly. Your composure transferred jurisdiction from personal defense to divine intervention. Romans 12:19 instructs leaving vengeance to the Lord, and leaving requires trust that justice operates without your amplification. When you chose not to engage on their level, you aligned with higher authority. The exploitation they believed would continue unchallenged activated spiritual accounting. Psalm 37:5-6 promises that committing your way to the Lord results in righteousness shining like the dawn, and dawn often follows longest night. What they saw as harmless manipulation accumulated as breach of spiritual boundary. Peace did not prevent justice. It invited it. The response now unfolding is not reactionary, but measured. Divine correction does not erupt impulsively. It unfolds precisely. You stand now not as someone who was weak, but as someone who was protected, because the peace you carried was never vulnerability, but verification of covering. They mistook composure for incapacity and kindness for naivety, yet what they confronted was not merely personality, but protection. Proverbs 21:30 reminds that no wisdom, insight, or plan can succeed against the Lord, and their strategies encountered limitation when they crossed sacred lines. Your peace was shield and signal simultaneously. It shielded your integrity while signaling heaven's oversight. What they thought they could manipulate freely has returned to them under law they cannot negotiate. Divine response has been set in motion not because you demanded it, but because covenant requires balance. Your peace did not make you powerless, it made you aligned. And alignment, when challenged repeatedly, triggers intervention that does not require noise, because the quiet strength they misread has now proven itself to be the very power that shifted the narrative permanently under divine authority. Chosen one, what unfolded around you was not a random misunderstanding, nor an unfortunate misalignment of personalities. It was calculated betrayal designed with intention to destabilize your focus and dilute your purpose. The patterns were too consistent to be accidental, the timing too precise to be coincidence, and the pressure too targeted to be dismissed as mere conflict. Psalm 55:12-14 describes betrayal not from an enemy in the distance, but from a companion once trusted.
and that is what made the wound sharper and the confusion heavier. They studied your strengths and searched for entry points, not because you were weak, but because you were called. What they attempted to fracture was not simply your confidence, but your clarity. This was not social tension, it was strategic interference. Ephesians 6:12 reminds you that the struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual forces operating through influence and deception. What appeared relational was deeply spiritual. What felt personal was profoundly purposeful. The betrayal was calculated because your assignment carried weight. The enemy used your personal vulnerabilities, past trauma, and unresolved memories as tools to keep you disoriented and reactive, attempting to pull you back into emotional cycles that once limited your growth.
They triggered old wounds subtly, reintroducing insecurities you thought you had healed, hoping you would question your discernment and retreat from momentum. 2 Corinthians 2:11 warns against being unaware of the enemy's schemes, because ignorance provides advantage to opposition. They pressed on areas where your heart was still tender, not to comfort, but to confuse. Conversations were framed to reopen doubts you had already overcome. Situations were arranged to remind you of past failures rather than current authority. The goal was not merely emotional discomfort, it was directional disruption. If they could keep you questioning yourself, they could delay your forward movement. If they could exhaust your confidence, they could distract you from destiny. What they saw as weakness was actually evidence of healing still in progress. They weaponized misunderstanding, hoping to keep you off course. Yet what they did not realize is that even before their strategy intensified, God's hand had already been shielding you in ways invisible yet decisive. Psalm 91 speaks of dwelling under the shadow of the Almighty, protected from traps and hidden dangers, and that shadow extended over every scheme. While they believed they were advancing unnoticed, heaven had already anticipated each move. Isaiah 54:17 promised that no weapon formed against you would prosper, and though formation occurred, fulfillment was denied. There were moments when you sensed something was not right, when intuition interrupted attachment, when unease redirected your trust, and those interruptions were not anxiety but protection. Proverbs 2:11 declares that discretion will protect you, and understanding will guard you. And understanding often comes through subtle internal warnings. You were never as exposed as you felt. Even when confusion lingered, preservation operated quietly. Their access was limited, though they believed it unrestricted. Protection preceded awareness. Every spiritual attack launched against your identity, your peace, and your direction was met with divine correction operating beyond your perception. You may have experienced delays that frustrated you, yet those delays prevented deeper entanglement. You may have encountered sudden disconnections that hurt initially, yet those separations interrupted long-term damage. Romans 8:28 assures that all things work together for good for those who love God. And good often manifests through redirection disguised as disappointment. The enemy attempted to entangle you emotionally, yet boundaries began forming within you without dramatic confrontation. You felt strengthening in discernment, increased caution in trust, and renewed clarity in prayer. What was meant to destabilize became catalyst for spiritual maturity. James 1:2-4 encourages counting trials as joy because they produce perseverance, and perseverance refines character into completeness. The warfare you endured refined your spiritual senses rather than dulling them. Attacks were answered not with equal aggression, but with reinforced covering. Correction unfolded through exposure rather than through revenge. This was spiritual warfare, not because of spectacle, but because of assignment. Because whenever purpose carries influence, resistance intensifies accordingly. Daniel 10 describes unseen battles influencing visible circumstances, and what you experienced mirrored that hidden dimension. They believed they were manipulating a person, yet they were confronting protections surrounding a calling. What they saw as interpersonal conflict was actually collision with divine intention. Your moments of doubt were temporary, yet your foundation remained intact because it was not built solely on emotion, but on covenant. Psalm 18:2 calls the Lord your fortress and deliverer, and fortress implies structural defense beyond immediate sight. The attempts to distract you from your path only sharpened your focus eventually. The misunderstandings they used as wedges became clarity once patterns repeated. What was designed to derail you ended up disciplining you. Spiritual warfare did not destroy you, it defined you. The battle clarified allegiance. Now you see, chosen one, that calculated betrayal exposed spiritual dynamics operating beneath surface tension, and awareness of those dynamics has strengthened your alignment rather than weakening your resolve. You were not targeted randomly. You were resisted intentionally because your trajectory threatened what thrives in confusion. Yet every scheme encountered sovereignty. Every manipulation met boundary. Every attempt to silence your progress was answered by protection already in place. Psalm 23 declares that even in the valley of shadow, you fear no evil, because God is with you, and that presence sustained you when clarity felt distant. The warfare you endured was not evidence of abandonment, but of significance. The betrayal that sought to fracture you revealed covering you could not see. And as you continue forward, understand this deeply. What was launched against you has been answered. What was intended to undermine you has reinforced you. And what was designed to distract you has refined you, proving that divine protection does not merely react to attack, but anticipates it, ensuring that even calculated betrayal cannot override destiny secured by the hand of God. Chosen one, what unfolded against you was never confined to emotion or personality. It crossed into territory governed by spiritual law. And when sacred alignment is violated, consequence is not optional, but inevitable. The betrayal you endured was not merely relational fracture. It was a disruption of covenantal order, because you were not operating independently, but under divine covering. Psalm 89:14 declares that righteousness and justice are the foundation of God's throne, which means alignment is not symbolic, but structural in the kingdom. When they distorted truth, manipulated trust, and exploited your integrity, they stepped beyond personal offense into spiritual trespass. Proverbs 6:16-19 lists lying tongues and sowing discord among the things the Lord detests, emphasizing that deception is not trivial in heaven's economy. What they dismissed as strategy was recorded as violation. What they justified as survival was registered as misalignment. You felt the pain personally, yet the breach extended spiritually. This was not simply heartbreak, it was boundary crossing under covenant. And covenant does not ignore transgression indefinitely. The actions they took against you accumulated spiritual debt that now demands settlement, because divine order does not operate on amnesia, but on accountability. Galatians 6:7 affirms that whatever a person sows, they will reap, and sowing generates harvest, whether acknowledged or denied. Each lie spoken, each manipulation engineered, and each moment of calculated harm added weight to a ledger they could not see. Ecclesiastes 12:14 declares that God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether good or evil, revealing that nothing evaporates into irrelevance. They may have believed that absence of immediate repercussion equaled immunity, yet delay does not mean dismissal. Spiritual debt accumulates quietly until maturity of consequence aligns with timing of exposure. Proverbs 22:8 warns that whoever sows injustice reaps calamity, and calamity often arrives gradually rather than dramatically. They thought they were maneuvering freely, they were accruing obligation. The imbalance they created required correction. What they released into motion began forming return. Debt in divine economy demands reconciliation. The universe operates under spiritual principles established by God, And energy directed toward harm never dissolves without return, because sowing and reaping is not poetic metaphor, but structural reality. Job 4:8 observes that those who plow evil reap trouble, illustrating cyclical consequence embedded in moral order. When someone channels intention toward destabilizing another aligned with purpose, that intention does not disappear. It circles back through circumstances shaped by divine calibration. Psalm 7:15-16 describes digging a pit and falling into it, with violence descending upon one's own head, revealing reciprocity inherent in justice. They sent confusion outward and now experience confusion internally. They projected instability and now inhabit instability relationally. They attempted to fracture your peace and now wrestle with unrest they cannot articulate. This is not mysticism. It is moral symmetry under sovereign governance. What is released returns in amplified form when unrepented. Energy misused transforms into burden. The cycle completes itself. Now they are experiencing the natural consequences of their own actions, though they may struggle to connect cause with effect, because awareness often trails consequence rather than preceding it. Proverbs 19:3 notes that a person's own folly ruins their life, yet their heart rages against the Lord, demonstrating how responsibility is frequently redirected outward. They may blame timing, accuse others of betrayal, or interpret loss as injustice against them. Yet beneath frustration lies unacknowledged participation. The instability surfacing in their world mirrors instability they once generated around you. Psalm 34:21 states that evil will slay the wicked, and slaying does not always mean destruction, but unraveling of constructed security. The relationships they relied upon weaken under distrust they normalized. The opportunities they assumed permanent evaporate under scrutiny they once ignored. Anxiety replaces confidence because conscience awakens under pressure. The price being paid is not arbitrary, it is proportional. Justice calibrates without cruelty, yet without compromise. Meanwhile, you stand, not as architect of their consequence, but as witness to principle unfolding, because your role was alignment rather than retaliation. Romans 12:19 instructs, leaving vengeance to the Lord. And leaving requires trust that law functions beyond your intervention. You were never responsible for enforcing balance. You were responsible for preserving integrity. Psalm 37:5-6 promises that committing your way to the Lord results in righteousness shining like the dawn, and dawn exposes what night concealed. Their breach of spiritual law triggered correction independent of your defense. What they interpreted as harmless manipulation has matured into undeniable consequence. You were not avenged through aggression. You were vindicated through order restored. Divine justice is neither rushed nor reckless. It unfolds with precision that protects both truth and timing. What they are facing now is not random misfortune, but return of what they released. The scales have recalibrated under authority higher than narrative. So understand this deeply, chosen one. Not to cultivate superiority, but to cultivate clarity. Because clarity prevents you from misinterpreting what you observe. Spiritual laws were breached when deception intersected covenant. Debt accumulated when intention targeted alignment. Return activated when sowing matured into harvest. They are paying a price not because you demanded it, but because divine order requires equilibrium. Proverbs 11:5 declares that the righteousness of the blameless makes their path straight, but the wicked fall by their own wickedness. And falling often appears self-inflicted, because it is. You were never the cause of their collapse. You were the mirror reflecting their character. What they initiated as harm returned as correction. What they sowed has surfaced as harvest. And as consequence unfolds around them, remember that justice is not spectacle, but structure. Ensuring that sacred boundaries are honored, covenant remains intact, and no breach of divine alignment remains unresolved under heaven's unwavering authority. Chosen one, There is a phase in divine justice when correction no longer operates quietly beneath the surface, but begins manifesting visibly through shifting circumstances, and you are witnessing that phase now. What was once readily available to them is gradually slipping from their grasp, not because chance has turned against them, but because alignment has shifted decisively. Revelation 3:7 declares that when God opens a door, no one can shut it, and when he shuts a door, no one can open it, revealing that access itself operates under divine authority. The pathways they once walked confidently now feel unstable, and the influence they once exercised easily now encounters resistance. They may interpret these shifts as coincidence or misfortune, yet spiritual recalibration is rarely accidental. The same confidence that once defined their movement has been replaced with uncertainty they cannot name. Doors that swung open without effort now remain closed despite attempts to push through. Momentum that once seemed inevitable now feels interrupted. What they relied upon is no longer responding the same way. Support has been withdrawn. Opportunities they assumed were guaranteed are vanishing quietly, because opportunity detached from integrity cannot remain sustainable under divine order. Proverbs 10:9 teaches that whoever walks in integrity walks securely, but whoever takes crooked paths will be found out, and exposure eventually affects access. Invitations have slowed, endorsements have weakened, and assurances once spoken confidently have dissolved into hesitation. Isaiah 22:22 reminds that divine authority governs access at a level beyond human networking or persuasion. They may attempt to replicate past strategies, yet those strategies yield diminishing results because the atmosphere that once enabled them has changed. What seemed permanent now reveals itself as provisional. What they counted on as stable proves conditional. Doors closing does not always make noise. Sometimes it manifests as delay, cancellation, or quiet rejection. The reliability they once enjoyed has thinned. What was once open has narrowed. Relationships that once appeared solid are fracturing without clear explanation, because connections rooted in convenience or manipulation cannot withstand scrutiny once truth surfaces. Amos 3:3 asks whether two can walk together unless they agree, and agreement founded on misalignment weakens under pressure. People who once aligned with them begin questioning inconsistencies. Trust, once extended easily, retracts cautiously. Proverbs 20:19 warns that a gossip betrays confidence, and betrayal eventually erodes relational credibility. Conversations once filled with enthusiasm now carry undertones of suspicion. Alliances once firm now reveal hidden fractures. The very dynamics they used to influence others begin working against them. Psalm 55:21 describes words smoother than butter, yet war in the heart, and those who once accepted smooth speech now perceive tension beneath it. Relationships built on control falter when control weakens. Without overt confrontation, separation unfolds organically. The universe, governed by divine order, is no longer supporting their actions, because alignment determines flow, and misalignment interrupts provision naturally. Proverbs 16:7 says that when a person's ways please the Lord, even enemies are at peace with them, implying that divine favor influences relational dynamics profoundly. Favor that once surrounded them now feels diminished, because favor and manipulation cannot coexist indefinitely. Psalm 127:1 teaches that unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain, and houses built without righteousness cannot endure structural strain. The systems that once seemed to cooperate with their ambition now resist subtly. Timing fails to synchronize. Efforts require more strain with less yield. What once felt effortless now feels exhausting. Divine redirection does not announce itself dramatically. It withdraws support quietly. The atmosphere shifts. This redirection is not random punishment, but invitation toward accountability, because correction often precedes clarity rather than follows collapse. Hebrews 12:6 reminds that the Lord disciplines those he loves, and discipline recalibrates direction. They may not immediately recognize that doors closing signal invitation to self-examination. Instead of interpreting resistance as warning, they may initially perceive it as obstruction. Yet obstruction often protects others and redirects the offender simultaneously. Proverbs 14:12 states that there is a way that seems right to a person, yet in the end it leads to destruction, and interruption prevents deeper damage. The narrowing of access serves as mirror reflecting internal condition. What they once externalized as strategy now confronts them internally as consequence. Accountability emerges through limitation. Their world does not collapse explosively, it constricts intentionally. As you observe these shifts, chosen one, understand that you are not architect of their closing doors, but witness to divine recalibration unfolding in real time. Romans 12:19 instructs leaving vengeance to the Lord, and what you are witnessing is not vengeance, but order being restored. Your silence created space for justice to unfold without contamination of personal retaliation. Psalm 37:23-24 assures that the Lord establishes the steps of the righteous, and while your steps are being steadied, theirs are being redirected. The contrast between your increasing clarity and their increasing instability is not coincidence, but consequence. What once felt unfair now reveals itself as transitional. Doors closing around them correspond with doors opening before you. Divine balance does not require noise, it requires timing. The universe is not opposing arbitrarily, it is correcting intentionally. So remain steady in perspective, because the closing of doors for them confirms that spiritual laws remain active and covenant remains intact. What was once available slips away because it was sustained by misalignment. Opportunities vanish because integrity governs longevity. Relationships fracture because authenticity exposes fragility. The universe, under divine authority, withdraws support from actions misaligned with truth. Accountability approaches through narrowing access rather than through dramatic confrontation. And as you continue walking forward under open doors prepared for you, remember that divine justice operates structurally, ensuring that what was once misused loses backing, what was once exploited loses advantage, and what was once manipulated loses momentum, proving that when sacred boundaries are breached, the response is not chaos, but recalibration, and recalibration closes doors not out of cruelty, but out of correction under heaven's unwavering order. Chosen one, what you are witnessing now extends far beyond shifting circumstances and closing doors, because the most significant consequences are unfolding internally within those who once appeared confident and unshakable. The composure they projected outwardly is no longer matching the turbulence rising within them, and the stability they once relied upon is eroding at a level they cannot conceal indefinitely. Proverbs 14:30 teaches that a heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones, revealing that internal unrest eventually manifests physically and emotionally. What once looked like certainty now feels fragile. What once sounded persuasive now carries undertones of insecurity. The calm exterior they curated is struggling to contain growing unrest. Psalm 32:3-4 describes the heaviness of unconfessed wrongdoing, draining strength like heat in summer. And that imagery captures what begins happening when imbalance matures into conviction. They are not merely facing external disruption, they are wrestling with internal instability. The battlefield has shifted inward. Anxiety, regret, and fear are gradually infiltrating their daily rhythm, replacing the ease they once displayed with restlessness they cannot easily explain. Proverbs 28:1 states that the wicked flee though no one pursues, illustrating how guilt generates fear even in absence of visible threat. They may awaken with unease without understanding its source. Conversations that once energized them now exhaust them. Silence that once empowered them now unsettles them. Ecclesiastes 7:20 reminds that no one is righteous entirely, yet accountability intensifies when wrongdoing remains unresolved. Regret surfaces in quiet moments, replaying decisions they once justified confidently. Fear whispers that consequences may escalate further. Their inner dialogue becomes more accusatory than affirming. The confidence that once anchored them has weakened under scrutiny. Anxiety has become companion rather than exception. The internal warfare they now experience is not random emotional fluctuation, but reflection of spiritual imbalance they themselves initiated. Because imbalance always demands correction within before it manifests fully without. James 3:16 teaches that where envy and selfish ambition exist, disorder and every evil practice follow. And disorder does not remain confined to relationships, but penetrates the mind. The chaos they cultivated outwardly has begun circulating inwardly. Psalm 7:14-16 describes conceiving trouble and giving birth to disappointment, revealing that internal turmoil often mirrors external intention. The strategies they use to destabilize you have destabilized their own emotional foundation. What they released as confusion now returns as mental unrest. What they initiated as manipulation now manifests as mistrust within themselves. Their conscience, once quieted, now speaks louder. Spiritual imbalance produces psychological strain. The internal battle intensifies. This mental and emotional breakdown is not exaggerated consequence, but proportional result of their actions against you. Because spiritual law governs both visible and invisible realms consistently. Galatians 6:8 warns that whoever sows to please the flesh reaps destruction. And destruction often begins as erosion of peace. They sowed instability into your life intentionally, and now instability circulates within their own thoughts. Proverbs 13:15 states that the way of the unfaithful is hard, indicating that internal strain accompanies moral deviation. They may attempt distraction, yet distraction cannot permanently silence conscience. They may seek validation externally, yet validation cannot restore internal equilibrium when imbalance persists. Fear increases because control diminishes. Regret intensifies because awareness expands. Their breakdown is not sudden, it is cumulative. What was planted earlier has matured internally. The consequence is not spectacle, but strain. Meanwhile, you experience a different trajectory internally, because Psalm 34:19 assures that though the righteous face many troubles, the Lord delivers them from them all. And deliverance includes restoration of peace. As their unrest rises, your clarity strengthens. As their anxiety expands, your discernment stabilizes. The contrast reveals alignment rather than superiority. Romans 8:6 teaches that the mind governed by the Spirit brings life and peace, and governance determines atmosphere. You chose alignment under pressure. They chose manipulation under opportunity. The internal outcome now reflects those decisions. Your silence preserved your stability. Their strategy compromised theirs. What once felt like imbalance in your favor now reveals itself as divine recalibration. Recognize, chosen one, that this internal chaos is not cause for celebration, but confirmation of principle. Divine justice does not merely rearrange circumstances, it restores equilibrium across dimensions. Psalm 37:35-36 describes observing the ruthless flourishing briefly, yet they soon pass and are not found, indicating that apparent stability detached from righteousness cannot endure. The peace they once disrupted has returned to you, fortified, while unrest they once projected now resides within them,
intensified. Their breakdown is not random tragedy, but mirror of imbalance. Spiritual warfare they initiated has reversed direction. Accountability has entered not only their environment, but their thoughts. And as internal chaos deepens for them, let it deepen your understanding that alignment protects from implosion, that integrity preserves mental stability, and that divine law governs the unseen realm as faithfully as the seen, ensuring that when imbalance is created against covenant, correction arises not only externally, but internally, until peace and justice are restored fully under heaven's unwavering authority. Chosen one, there comes a moment in divine justice when consequences are no longer theoretical or distant, but tangible and undeniable. And that moment has arrived for those who chose betrayal over integrity. What once appeared as calculated advantage now reveals itself as accumulating liability. Because time does not erase what has been sown, it matures it.
Galatians 6:7 declares that a person reaps what they sow, and that principle does not bend to preference or personality. The consequences catching up to them are not sudden accidents, but harvests ripened under spiritual law. They may attempt to rationalize circumstances or reinterpret events, yet patterns have become too consistent to dismiss. Doors close, relationships fracture, stability weakens, and they recognize internally that something larger than coincidence is unfolding. Psalm 9:16 states that the Lord is known by the justice he executes, and justice often reveals itself through repetition of consequence until denial becomes impossible. What they once sent outward has circled back inward. The inevitability of return is unmistakable. Their lies, manipulation, and exploitation have generated a debt that cannot be outrun, because spiritual law operates beyond geography, beyond reinvention, and beyond narrative control. Proverbs 22:8 warns that whoever sows injustice reaps calamity, and calamity does not require immediate explosion to be effective. It unfolds gradually until stability erodes. They may change environments, adjust alliances, or attempt to reconstruct identity, yet unresolved sowing follows wherever they go. Ecclesiastes 8:8 reminds that no one has power over the wind, nor authority over the day of death, implying limitation of control in ultimate matters. The debt created by distortion of truth and misuse of trust is not symbolic. It manifests through erosion of credibility, trust, and peace. Psalm 7:15-16 describes digging a pit and falling into it, illustrating that strategies of harm reverse direction eventually. They believed speed and strategy could outrun accountability, yet accountability does not chase, it waits. Time does not dilute debt, it compounds it. The harvest now speaks louder than their excuses. The running has ended. The things they extracted from you, your peace, your opportunities, your energy, are now being withdrawn from their own lives in proportionate measure, because divine balance restores symmetry across circumstances. Isaiah 61:7 promises double portion instead of shame for the righteous, implying that what was lost is restored and amplified. While your peace strengthens, theirs diminishes. While clarity increases for you, confusion multiplies for them. What they once disrupted in your life now unsettles their own. Psalm 37:35-36 describes observing the ruthless flourishing briefly, yet they soon pass and cannot be found, revealing temporary nature of advantage built on harm. They drained your emotional reserves temporarily, yet now they experience depletion they cannot explain. The stability they once enjoyed has thinned. The opportunities they assumed permanent slip away. What they took has become what they lack.
Balance is being restored not through revenge, but through recalibration. The universe, governed by divine authority, returns exactly what is released into it, because sowing establishes trajectory, and trajectory culminates in outcome. Job 4:8 observes that those who plow evil reap trouble, underscoring inevitability of return. They invested in confusion, and confusion now clouds their discernment. They invested in manipulation, and manipulation now undermines their own relationships. They invested in exploitation, and now they feel exploited by circumstances beyond their control. Proverbs 11:5 states that the wicked fall by their own wickedness, and falling often appears self-inflicted because seeds were self-planted. The weight they now carry is not imposed externally, it is generated internally. Anxiety, regret, and instability reflect imbalance finally acknowledged. What they put into the world has matured into burden. The return is exact because divine scales measure precisely. Reciprocity governs unseen realms as faithfully as seen.
This weight they now bear feels heavier than anticipated, because they calculated outcome without accounting for covenant, assuming your silence equaled absence of protection. Psalm 121 affirms that the Lord watches over you, and neither slumbers nor sleeps, meaning oversight never ceased. When they interfered with your peace, they interfered with what was guarded. The consequences now pressing upon them are not dramatic vengeance, but proportional consequence calibrated under justice. Proverbs 19:3 explains that a person's own folly ruins their life, yet their heart rages against the Lord, illustrating how accountability often precedes understanding. They may resist acknowledging cause, yet resistance does not dissolve reality. The pressure intensifies until recognition emerges. The debt demands settlement. The harvest demands acknowledgement. Meanwhile, you stand under different influence, because Psalm 23 declares that your cup overflows and goodness follows you, signifying reversal of scarcity. What they extracted from you has been restored through clarity, discernment, and peace fortified by experience. You are no longer depleted, you are strengthened. Romans 8:28 assures that all things work together for good for those aligned with purpose, and even betrayal has been converted into refinement. The contrast between your stability and their instability confirms spiritual equilibrium restored. Their attempts to derail you accelerated your discernment. Their exploitation deepened your boundaries. Their manipulation clarified your authority. What they sowed has returned to them. What you preserved has multiplied for you. Understand this deeply, chosen one, not as triumph over another, but as testimony to law that cannot be escaped. Karma, as the world names it, reflects biblical principle of sowing and reaping embedded in divine governance. The consequences are not coincidence, they are culmination. They cannot outrun debt accumulated under spiritual law, because law is woven into creation. What they released into the world has circled back, weighted and undeniable. The burden now pressing upon them reflects imbalance they initiated. And as you move forward under restored peace, remember that justice required no retaliation from you, because the universe under God's authority ensures that what is sown returns faithfully, that what is taken unjustly is recalibrated precisely, and that no breach of sacred boundary remains unresolved, proving that divine order stands unshaken while manipulation collapses beneath the very weight it created. Chosen one, as the consequences of their actions continue unfolding around them, a deeper and more personal reckoning has begun to take shape within them, and it is no longer subtle or avoidable. What once felt like calculated confidence has dissolved into internal confrontation, and they are now forced to observe the ripple effects of choices they once defended. Proverbs 28:13 declares that whoever conceals their sins does not prosper, but the one who confesses and renounces them finds mercy. And concealment has reached its limit. They are consumed by growing awareness that what they initiated did not end when you walked away silently. It multiplied quietly. Psalm 38:4 speaks of guilt overwhelming, like a burden too heavy to bear, and that burden now presses against them in moments of stillness. The narrative they once controlled no longer comforts them. The rationalizations that once excused their behavior no longer satisfy their conscience. Regret has begun to erode the confidence they once projected. They recognize internally that harm was not accidental, but intentional. Awareness is heavier than denial. They feel the weight physically and emotionally, as though their bodies are responding to what their conscience now refuses to suppress. Proverbs 17:22 reminds me that a crushed spirit dries up the bones, and internal unrest often manifests externally in exhaustion and unease. They replay conversations in their minds, remembering words spoken with hidden motives and moments where truth was twisted deliberately. The harm they caused now echoes back to them through silence and consequence. Psalm 51 reveals David's awareness of sin weighing heavily upon him, acknowledging that wrongdoing remains before him constantly, and that constant awareness resembles what they now experience. They may feel sick to their stomachs, not only because doors have closed, but because clarity has opened. What once seemed strategic now appears shameful. The betrayal they committed cannot be reframed convincingly anymore. The harm inflicted cannot be softened by narrative. Conscience has awakened fully. The internal mirror reflects what they avoided seeing. Now they begin rehearsing apologies privately, forming sentences in their minds and imagining conversations where confession might relieve pressure building inside them. Proverbs 20:22 warns against saying, "I will repay evil," because justice belongs to the Lord, and now they sense repayment unfolding without their control. They contemplate reaching out, not necessarily because transformation has occurred, but because discomfort demands relief. The apology being constructed is often shaped by urgency rather than repentance. They are searching for words that might lessen the weight pressing against them. Psalm 34:18 declares that the Lord is close to the brokenhearted, yet brokenness rooted in consequence differs from brokenness rooted in humility. They may attempt vulnerability in tone, hoping that acknowledgement might reverse what has already unfolded. Regret fuels urgency. Discomfort motivates outreach. The desire to make things right may coexist with fear of further loss. Their confession, rehearsed internally, carries undertones of survival. But you, chosen one, perceive the difference between remorse that seeks restoration and confession that seeks relief, because discernment has matured within you through trial. 1 John 1:9 teaches that confession leads to cleansing, yet cleansing requires sincerity aligned with repentance rather than convenience. You understand that timing matters, and that not all apologies signal transformation. Their attempt to reconcile may be driven by awareness of consequence rather than reverence for covenant. The pressure they feel internally is not primarily about restoring relationship. It is about stabilizing their own environment. They seek to quiet conscience and perhaps reopen doors that have closed under justice. Yet Proverbs 4:23 urges guarding your heart above all else, because everything flows from it, and guarding includes discerning motive. You recognize patterns now more clearly. You sense the difference between healing and self-preservation. The apology rehearsed may not be rooted in accountability, but in discomfort. It is too late, not because forgiveness is impossible, but because seasons have shifted irreversibly, and restoration does not always include reinstatement. Ecclesiastes 3:1 declares there is a time for everything, and some windows close permanently under divine recalibration. What they once disregarded casually now carries consequence that cannot be undone through words alone. Psalm 37:10 reminds that the wicked will soon be no more, indicating that positions and access once taken for granted do not remain indefinitely. You are no longer standing where you once stood emotionally. You are no longer vulnerable in the same way. What was broken has been rebuilt with boundaries and wisdom. Their confession may ease their conscience partially, yet it does not automatically restore what was lost. Divine justice allowed consequence to mature. The season of exploitation has ended. The season of reckoning has arrived. As guilt and regret intensify within them, you stand anchored not in revenge, but in revelation. Because revelation clarifies that your silence was not weakness, but preparation. Romans 12:19 reminds me that vengeance belongs to the Lord, and the unfolding discomfort within them confirms that justice operates beyond your intervention. Their internal turmoil testifies that sacred boundaries were crossed. Their regret reveals recognition of misalignment. Yet recognition does not erase harvest already ripened. What they now feel cannot be outsourced or transferred. The burden they carry reflects imbalance corrected. And as they rehearse apologies, searching for relief, you remain steady, understanding that true healing requires transformation beyond confession, and that divine timing has already determined the boundaries of restoration, ensuring that while guilt may grow and regret may deepen, the recalibration of your life proceeds forward under protection, clarity, and authority that cannot be reversed by words spoken too late. Chosen one, the timing of this reckoning is not random, delayed, or accidental. It is precise, calibrated, and aligned with the season you have been prepared to enter long before you recognized it. Ecclesiastes 3:11 declares that God makes everything beautiful in its time, and beauty often emerges not from absence of conflict, but from resolution of it under divine authority. You may have wondered in earlier days why justice seemed postponed and clarity seemed restrained. Yet delay was not denial, it was development. Vindication arrived at the moment you were strong enough not to be consumed by it, humble enough not to misuse it, and wise enough to steward it. The reckoning unfolded when your identity no longer depended on validation. Psalm 27:13-14 encourages waiting for the Lord and being strong in heart, and strength matured in you quietly, while timing aligned invisibly. Now the atmosphere has shifted. The scale has balanced. The season has changed. You are ready. While those who betrayed you experience panic and instability, you step forward into divine favor, not as reaction, but as progression. Proverbs 16:7 says that when the Lord delights in a person's way, he causes even enemies to live at peace with them, and peace now surrounds you more naturally than conflict once did. The anxiety rising in them contrasts sharply with the steadiness forming within you. Isaiah 61 commands rising and shining because light has come, and rising does not require pushing others down, it requires responding to illumination. As they scramble to regain control, you move with clarity rather than urgency. Doors open before you without force. Conversations align without strain. Psalm 5:12 declares that the Lord surrounds the righteous with favor as with a shield, and that shield is evident in how smoothly your next steps unfold. Vindication is not loud applause, it is quiet confirmation. Favor feels effortless when aligned with timing. You are no longer defending, you are advancing. God has already prepared you for this next season, and the lessons carved into your spirit through betrayal have fortified you for elevation, rather than embittered you for isolation. Romans 8:28 reminds that all things work together for good for those called according to his purpose, and betrayal became instrument of refinement rather than derailment. You learned discernment without losing compassion. You established boundaries without surrendering kindness. You strengthened resilience without hardening your heart. James 1:4 teaches that perseverance finishes its work, so you may be mature and complete, lacking nothing. And maturity now anchors your decisions. What once destabilized you now instructs you. What once confused you now clarifies red flags immediately. You are not entering this new season naive. You are entering prepared. The very pain meant to shrink you has expanded your capacity.
The betrayal became curriculum for leadership. The confession they rehearse, the guilt they carry, and the regret pressing against their conscience are part of divine process. Yet they no longer hold authority over your trajectory. Psalm 37:23-24 assures that the Lord makes firm the steps of the righteous, and though they stumble, they will not fall, because He upholds them. You are upheld regardless of their emotional state. Their remorse may be genuine or self-protective, yet your direction does not hinge upon it. The reckoning unfolding within them belongs to their journey of accountability. Your responsibility is not to manage their conscience, but to steward your calling. Proverbs 4:25 urges fixing your gaze straight ahead and not turning to the right or left, emphasizing forward focus. What they feel internally does not dictate your movement externally. Their regret cannot rewind seasons. Their panic cannot postpone your promotion. The process they undergo is theirs to navigate. Divine timing ensures that vindication arrives when it strengthens rather than distracts you, and that is why you now experience peace instead of triumph, clarity instead of chaos. Psalm 18:20 affirms that the Lord has dealt with you according to your righteousness, not because you were flawless, but because you were faithful. Vindication under God's timing removes the need for argument. You no longer feel compelled to explain yourself to those who misunderstood you. You no longer seek acknowledgement from those who misjudged you. The evidence of divine favor speaks quietly but convincingly. The stability you carry now reflects restoration completed. The doors opening reflect preparation finished. The atmosphere around you reflects recalibration finalized. Justice has matured fully. So move forward, chosen one, knowing that the timing of your vindication was never dependent on your defense, but on divine decree. While they wrestle with consequences and rehearse confessions, you walk into alignment already established. While they attempt to stabilize collapsing narratives, you build upon foundations strengthened through trial. God has shifted the season. The lessons from betrayal propel you rather than paralyze you. The regret they carry belongs to their reckoning. The peace you carry belongs to your promotion. And as you step into what has been prepared, remember that divine timing never rushes, yet never fails, ensuring that when justice arrives, it not only corrects imbalance, but elevates you into clarity, favor, and authority that cannot be undone by past harm. Because the season of vindication is not about proving them wrong, but about positioning you right under heaven's perfect and unchallengeable timing. Chosen one, stand firmly in this truth. You are not the one who needs to apologize, explain, or shrink yourself to make others comfortable with the consequences of their own actions. You now stand in the victory of divine protection and justice, not because you fought harder, but because you trusted longer. Psalm 91 promised that no harm would overtake you, and no disaster would come near your dwelling. And that promise has proven itself not as theory, but as lived reality. What once felt like vulnerability has revealed itself as covering. What once felt like silence has revealed itself as strategy. You are not standing in pride, you are standing in preservation fulfilled. The peace you guarded has been returned, strengthened. The integrity you maintained has been vindicated publicly and spiritually. Meanwhile, those who chose betrayal now face the consequences shaped by their own decisions, while you walk into spaces marked by new favor and unexpected alignment. Proverbs 11:5 declares that the righteousness of the blameless makes their path straight, but the wicked fall by their own wickedness. And that principle has unfolded without your intervention. You did not engineer their unraveling. Divine order did. As instability presses upon them, stability anchors you. As regret shadows them, clarity guides you. Isaiah 60:15 speaks of moving from rejection to everlasting honor, and that transition reflects your current reality. Doors are opening that require no striving. Opportunities arise without manipulation. Influence grows without self-promotion. Favor surrounds you quietly, yet unmistakably. The final truth settles deeply now. You never needed revenge. You only needed trust. Romans 12:19 reminds me that vengeance belongs to the Lord, and that divine repayment is always more precise than human retaliation. Had you fought back emotionally, you might have complicated what heaven intended to clarify. Had you sought to defend your name aggressively, you might have blurred the evidence of your integrity. Instead, you surrendered the outcome and preserved your peace, allowing justice to unfold without contamination. Trust became your weapon, silence became your shield, patience became your strength, and divine justice prevailed without requiring you to compromise who you are. Now the apology may come, shaped by guilt, regret, or the need for relief, and you will recognize it for what it is. Forgiveness remains powerful and necessary because Ephesians 4:32 calls you to forgive as you have been forgiven. Yet forgiveness does not require reinstatement. Forgiveness frees your heart. It does not obligate you to revisit what God has already closed. Your future does not reside in revisiting betrayal, but in stewarding purpose. The past may seek conversation, but your calling demands progression. You can release without returning. You can forgive without reopening. You can acknowledge without retreating. The chapter of betrayal is closed decisively, not with bitterness, but with clarity. A new season of purpose, favor, and influence is beginning, and you step into it carrying wisdom rather than wounds.
Psalm 23 declares that goodness and mercy follow you all the days of your life, and that pursuit is forward-moving, not backward-looking. You are not the one who must apologize for surviving, for discerning, or for moving on. You trusted divine justice, and divine justice answered. Now you walk ahead not as victim, not as avenger, but as one vindicated, protected, and positioned for the next assignment prepared by God. Heavenly Father, thank you for your protection over my life. Thank you for being my defender and advocate. I trust your divine justice, knowing that every wrong will be made right in your perfect timing. Help me to walk in forgiveness and grace, but also to set boundaries where necessary. I receive the new season you have for me, and I trust that the doors you open will not close. In Jesus' name, amen.